Hello everybody, welcome back this fine Thursday to another one of ZooMontana's educational videos. This topic is a little bit special because we're going to break it into two segments. So this week we're going to be talking about like the basis and the foundation of the topic, and then in next Thursday's video we're actually going to be applying the topic, and I'll kind of be walking you through how to create a diagram that this topic revolves around. For those of you who have not met me, I am educator Emily, and this week we will be talking about phylogenies and evolution. So much like next week, the chances of this being a little bit of a longer video are rather high, just because this is extremely complicated, and in order for it to make sense, you really have to kind of delve down into the nitty-gritty a little bit more. So stay tuned, we're going to learn about why, birds are dinosaurs, and we're going to learn about endangered species and genetic diversity and something called the bottleneck effect. And we'll be talking about pets and artificial selection and a bunch of other things, and I have a bunch of fun diagrams and some cool little biofacts to show you guys throughout this video. In this video, we are going to be kind of skimming the surface of natural selection. Stay tuned in June for videos more in depth on natural selection, as well as on kin selection and sexual selection. We'll have a video dedicated to each one. But for this week, sit tight and get ready to learn all about phylogenies and evolution and why they're so important to science. Alright, before we delve into the nitty-gritty process of evolution and phylogenies, let's set a simple baseline so that everybody is kind of on the same page with where we are starting. So the easiest place to begin is the beginning of it all, which is the creation of Earth. And Earth coalesced from a bunch of rocks and debris floating around in space about 4.5 billion years ago. So 4.5 billion years ago, all of these rocks and other debris were pulled together by gravitational forces, coalesced to form this blob that is Earth. In the beginning, it was not very habitable. It was, full of volcanoes and molten lava, and temperatures were weird and wacky, and things were exploding. Earth's beginning phases were not the most calm. Give it about 1 billion years, and we start to see the first forms of life emerge, and these guys are tiny little amoebas and bacteria, something that's really, really small and really, really basic. And these were the first forms of life, and some of these actually fossilized, and we'll talk about fossils in a little bit, but some of these forms of life actually fossilized, which is how scientists know that the first life forms existed about 3.5 billion years ago. So since those first life forms emerged 3.5 billion years ago, life has been forever adapting and evolving to live throughout Earth's various habitats. However, not all life forms have been around for the entire time of Earth's existence and for the entire time that life has been around. Many, in fact, have gone extinct, and many are continuing to, unfortunately, go extinct. And this is because they're unable to adapt to the changes that are happening throughout the planet. However, the ones that are alive are the descendants of their ancestors that could adapt to the changes throughout Earth's history. Now, there are some groups of animals, like the sharks, who have been around for 450 million years, and the crocodiles, who have been around for 95 million years, who relatively remain unchanged. So if we were to go back in history to the Jurassic Cretaceous period, and look down in the ocean and look for a shark, and compare it to its modern relative, the great white shark or the bull shark or whatever have you, them and crocodiles will have looked very similar, millions of years ago up until now, whereas some organisms, like mammals, have radiated from these teeny tiny little rodents to become, humans and African wild dogs and domestic cats and panthers and pangolins and a whole variety of species. So for organisms to stand the test of time, they have to adapt and evolve. A shark from 450 million years ago isn't going to live in Earth's present climate, right? That's why you don't see the sharks from 450 million years ago. You see their adapted descendants. Granted, the body plan and the way that they live in their environment didn't really change, but that's not the same organism. And organisms today, just because they exist today, does not mean that they've stopped evolving. It doesn't mean that they've kind of reached their evolutionary peak and this is it, this is as great as it's gonna get. They are still constantly evolving. Evolution doesn't stop. Evolution continues to move on. Evolution can be extremely slow, it can take thousands or millions of years, or evolution can be relatively quick, and we'll talk about some of those changes and what they mean a little bit later on. I've said the word evolution like, I don't even know, 6, 7, 8, 20 times. What does it mean? What does it mean to evolve? What is the definition of evolution? So evolution is the process by which a species or a population changes over successive generations due to inherited traits. New species or new populations can arise from pre-existing forms, and this relies on the passing on of genetic traits from parent to offspring. I've also said the word adaptation multiple times, and in previous videos we have talked about various animal adaptations, but just to define it again, an adaptation is a physical or behavioral trait, kind of like a tool, that an animal uses to live in its environment. And these adaptations can be behavioral or physical. So a perfect example of a behavioral adaptation is something like a herd or a school, right? Gathering a bunch of your members of the same species in a group for protection and socializing. Another example of maybe a physical adaptation is something like teeth. So here on this diagram, you've got a caribou herd exhibiting this behavioral adaptation, and you have warthog tusks, which are modified teeth. Now, adaptations are a result of evolution. There's also a phenomenon known as acclimation. And acclimation and adaptation often get very confused with one another, but they are not the same thing. Acclimation is the process by which an organism, an individual, adjusts to its new climate or its new habitat. This takes place over the span of an organism's life, or a segment within an organism's life. So, for example, if you move to a new city, you acclimatize yourself to the environment of that city, right? You're not adapting to this new city because the changes that you make there aren't irreversible. Adaptation is a physical or a chemical change. So think something within the DNA that makes up the organism that is changing. Acclimation is a mere reaction to some conditions. An adaptation occurs on a population level, and acclimation occurs on an individualistic level. Evolution and adaptations do not occur on individualistic levels, they occur on population and species level. How do we know these things? How do we know that scientists aren't just pulling these ideas out of thin air? There's a super cool thing called the fossil record, and it's stored within layers and layers and layers and layers of rock that's deposited all over the globe. And it's from this fossil record that we are able to determine what life on Earth used to be like. So the fossil record is the organization of known fossils into chronological order and taxonomic groups to provide a history from past geologic events. So if you're ever driving by like a big rock formation, you can kind of see how the rocks deposit themselves in layers. And they deposit themselves in layers over time, and they have been doing so for billions of years. These rock layers provide paleontologists and geologists with snapshots of what the Earth was like at a point in time. So not only do the chemical compositions of these rock layers change depending on how much carbon dioxide and other chemicals were in the air, but the organisms that are found fossilized within these rock layers, think dinosaurs, think, prehistoric plants, can tell the paleontologists and geologists what lived in a certain area of the world at a certain point in time. And then you can use those fossils to make comparisons to modern day organisms and start to create a phylogenetic tree, which we will be talking about later. This fossil record is a wealth of information. It is so much, and we've learned so much from it. One of the best examples of this is dinosaurs and their modern relatives, which are the birds. So because of the immense fossil record of these dinosaurs, scientists were able to determine that they were actually the prehistoric relatives of your modern cardinals and chickadees and turkey vultures and hawks, which is really, really cool. So, to get into the specifics of all of this, birds are descended from a group of dinosaurs known as the Theropods. These guys were characterized as being bipedal, so walking upright on two legs, having a pubis bone in the pelvis that pointed downward as opposed to backwards, having hollow bones and three-toed limbs. Now in this diagram, you guys can see the difference between various dinosaur pelvic morphology, between Saurischia, which are dinosaurs like your Theropods, where the pubis, which is that white bone, is pointing downward, versus Ornithischia, which are animals animals like your Stegosaurus and your Triceratops, where the pubis is pointing backwards. And this orientation of the pubis determined how the animal would walk, whether it would walk upright bipedally or on all fours. Now, your theropods included some of the most characteristic dinosaurs of all time, such as Tyrannosaurus rex, Allosaurus, Velociraptor, Deinonychus, these super cool, iconic dinosaurs. So one of the characteristics of theropod dinosaurs was that they walked upright and that they had 3 toes on their feet. This is a footprint of a extinct theropod found in a mine in Utah, belonging to a carnivore, basically just meaning that it ate meat. So this could be something like Allosaurus or T-Rex, right? You have that 3-toed limb structure here. So this is a very characteristic footprint of what a theropod, granted a very large theropod, would look like. Now, comparing that with the cast of an eagle's foot, granted, it is much, much smaller and the eagle has an extra talon in the back for grasping, you can see a lot of just morphological similarities between the theropod foot and the eagle foot. Specifically, the fact that they both are bipedal, 3-toed, primarily organisms, excluding this extra talon for grasping onto branches and for perching. Can't imagine an Allosaurus or a T-Rex perching in a tree, can you? That would be terrifying. Really funny. Really funny, but terrifying. Let's talk about how scientists even started to come to this conclusion in the first place. So the theory that birds descended from dinosaurs is actually a very old theory, and it first came about in the 1860s when in Germany, when a fossilized Archaeopteryx skeleton was found. This was a huge breakthrough in paleontology because it clearly depicted fossilized feathers, the imprints of feathers, and this was the first dinosaur-like organism that was shown to have fossilized feathers. And there were many characteristics that kind of made scientists and paleontologists believe that this was the quote-unquote missing link between birds and dinosaurs because it had characteristics of both. So its bird characteristics included feathers, right? All modern birds have feathers, and a wishbone. The dinosaur characteristics that Archaeopteryx had were teeth. Modern birds lack teeth, and a long, bony tail. Now, Archaeopteryx lived about 150 million years ago, and it was around this point in time that scientists kind of began to think that this evolution from dinosaurs into birds was more of a dramatic leap as opposed to a very slow, gradual change over time. However, very recently, in the past 20 to 30 years, scientists, paleontologists, paleoartists, they've kind of started to change their view on how we view dinosaurs and their evolution. Instead of scientists believing that this was a very rapid leap that occurred about 150 million years ago with Archaeopteryx, they now believe it was a gradual, slow change that occurred over millions of years. So do you remember those theropod dinosaurs we talked about earlier, the Allosaurus and the T-Rex and those big, scary, charismatic dinosaur critters, owners of these giant feats? Within theropods, there's a subgroup called the Coelurosaurs, and scientists believe now that it was those Coelurosaurs, specifically your Oviraptor, your Microraptor, your Velociraptor, that gave rise to modern-day birds. In addition, we now know that most dinosaurs probably did have feathers, whether or not they were extremely primitive bristles or the, finely evolved feather with a shaft that might have been adapted for flight. Scientists can even begin to infer the colors of these feathers on the dinosaurs by using fossilized melanosomes, which are the color pigments within these feathers. But the structure of the melanosome can tell the paleontologist and the scientist whether or not the feathers on the dinosaur were brown or red or even purple or like an iridescent shiny green. So we can start to see what these dinosaurs might have looked like as opposed to leaving it completely up to artistic interpretation. Another piece of evidence for this evolution from dinosaurs into birds is a decrease in size about 200 million years ago. So right before Archaeopteryx came onto the scene, there was an overall decrease in size in the theropods. So they decreased from being these gargantuan critters to becoming smaller. This allowed them to not only expand into different environmental niches, but it also allowed them to fly easier, right? You're not going to be able to lift off the ground extremely easily if you're the size of a T-Rex. But if you're the size of an Archaeopteryx, it's going to be a lot easier to become airborne or buoyant. You're just smaller, you weigh less. And this decrease in size could have arose from, a myriad of reasons. It could have been a change in the climate, it could have been a change in the food source. That decrease in size, the cause of it, it's not completely known. All that we know is that, through the fossil record over the course of time, about 200 million years ago, there was a decrease in size of these Coelurosaurian theropods. In addition, scientists have also found evidence of air sacs in fossilized specimens that might have helped dinosaurs to breathe. And lastly, while fossilization can tell us the physical attributes of an animal, it can also give us insights into how that animal might have behaved. So if you checked out our animal adaptations video where I used this footprint again, I talk about how scientists use tracks to, determine whether or not an animal was solitary or social, the speed it was traveling, how heavy it was, etc., etc. That's an example of using a fossil to infer a behavioral characteristic of the animal that left it. And there are other fossils, including nests of eggs with adult dinosaurs surrounding them, that might infer that there were dinosaurs that brooded and cared for their young, similar to how birds do. One of these characteristic examples is Maiasaura, which is the state dinosaur of Montana. Maiasaura fossils have been found with nests of eggs, as well as with juvenile young without teeth, which might mean that these Maiasaura had a juvenile care period where they actually were mothers to their offspring, which is a characteristic that we see in modern birds. So from parental care to three-toed limbs to feathers, there's plenty of evidence that science has that backs up the theory that our dinosaurs are the descendants of these giant dinosaurs, which is really, really cool. We still have dinosaurs living among us, which, as someone who is really into dinosaurs, is still really into dinosaurs, but as someone who loved dinosaurs as a kid, it's super cool knowing that when I'm looking at a cardinal sitting on a branch, that it is the descendant of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. That's so cool. Obviously, this is a really big change to no longer have tyrannosaurs walking down our street, and instead we have these really tiny and frankly kind of cute birds that sing little songs and hop around in our front yards. How did this happen? One of the drivers for evolution is natural selection, and this is the process in nature in which organisms that are fit to survive in their environment are more likely to pass on genes to their offspring than organisms that are not as fit to survive in their environment. And this gives rise to the concept of, survival of the fittest. As a result of this disparity, you start to see more successful genes arising in the population from those organisms who are able to, survive to reproductive age and create offspring, as opposed to the individuals who maybe aren't as fit in their environment and are unable to survive to reproductive age and thus unable to pass their genes onto their offspring. So you start to see the prevalence of successful genes and the disappearance of unfit genes. You need to have genetic variation for natural selection to occur. So this variation that you see anyway, creating the organism over here that is fit to survive in the environment, and the organism over here that maybe isn't so fit, you need to have variation, and this variation arises through the process of genetic mutation. So mutations occur when there is an error in the copying of DNA. And these mutations can be beneficial, meaning that they help the organism in which the mutation arises. These mutations can be neutral, meaning it really makes no difference to the organism whether or not that mutation is there or not. Or these mutations can be detrimental or deleterious, meaning that they actually might cause the organism to die. And thus, if you have a deleterious mutation and the organism dies, the chances of that mutation being passed on to future generations is very low. Now, we know all of this fun gene stuff through the study of genetics, which is the study of heredity, or the passing of genes from parent to offspring, which we've talked about a lot. That's the driving process for natural selection, is the passing on of genes from parents to offspring. Now, a mutation doesn't have to be huge to give give rise to major evolutionary changes, right? So you don't need to have a mutation that, you know, all of a sudden gives you purple hair or an extra limb or maybe 2 mouths in order for some weird evolutionary change to occur. These mutations can be very, very small and very, very minute, and they can, you know, cause a whole tidal wave of changes later on down the line. One of the cool examples of this is the evolution of the bird beak. One of the scientists studying this is Dr. Arkat Abzanov at Harvard University, and he's studying the evolution of the bird's beak. Now, we already know that birds are descended from dinosaurs, but when you look at a dinosaur, you don't see a beak. You see this terrifying, gaping jaw full of teeth, and that's not what birds look like today. So he and his colleagues were trying to isolate the gene that's responsible for the formation of a bird beak. Abzanov and his colleagues were trying to figure out how we went from this, which is a very lovely Deinonychus skull replica, it's not real, to this, the skull of a great horned owl. These guys look very different despite being related. So how on earth did we get from here over to here? Well, in most vertebrate skulls, the premaxillary bones are divided. So let me show you a mammalian skull where it's a little bit more obvious to see this. So this is a coyote skull. This is actually a real coyote skull. And if you look down the top of what would be the mouth of this coyote, you can see a suture line or a dividing line going down the premaxillary and maxillary bones of this animal. And this dividing line prevents these bones from fusing into one. And it's the fusing of these bones that actually creates a bird beak. So to figure this out, Abzanov and his colleagues basically mapped the genomes of a bunch of different vertebrates ranging from mice to birds to crocodiles to turtles. So they mapped the genome of all these organisms and finally were able to isolate the one single gene that's responsible for either creating this suture line, you know, down in the premaxillary bones of the vertebrate, or causing them to fuse, making a beak. Now, once they identified that gene, they had to test their theory that it was indeed this gene that, you know, fused the bones together. They did this using chicken embryos. Now, they were able to manipulate the genomes of these chicken embryos. When they blocked or turned off that gene and they watched the embryos develop, the embryos actually developed skulls that mimicked and looked more so like dinosaur skull morphology as opposed to your typical chicken head morphology. Now, for obvious ethical reasons, these chicks were not able to, you know, grow to term and hatch. But by identifying that single gene, Abzanov and colleagues were able to identify the gene in which that mutation occurred that got us from Deinonychus skulls over here to the fusing of the premaxillary bones to create bird beaks that we see today in modern birds. So just this mutation in one single gene somewhere along the line in the evolution of birds to dinosaurs gave us this bird beak. So one simple tiny mutation can, you know, change the whole facial morphology of a group of organisms, which is really cool. Now, we've already talked about this a little bit, but evolution cannot occur on an individualistic level. Evolution occurs on a population level. So while adaptations arise in individuals, evolution occurs on a population level. An individual itself cannot evolve. It's only the passing on of its genes into subsequent generations that can cause evolution to occur. Now, this often happens just within a population, and it's really not dependent on what other populations are doing. But in some cases, it is. And in some cases, some populations of organisms and some species even actually evolve together. They're so intertwined and they interact with each other so much in their environment that they actually evolve together. And this is often the case in predator-prey relationships. So predator-prey relationships are pretty crucial, you know, for each other's survival. The predator has to be able to catch the prey in order to eat and reproduce and survive, and the prey has to be able to evade the predator to reproduce and survive. As a result of this, the predator is going to evolve ways to best be able to capture its prey. It's going to become faster, it's going to be more camouflaged, it's going to become silent, it's going to have, you know, maybe more curved claws, or its teeth might curve backwards or forwards in a way to prevent the prey from escaping. And the prey is going to evolve adaptations that are going to allow allow it to better escape the predator. So it might become faster. It might become more camouflaged. Maybe it will evolve to, taste bad or be poisonous. And so this kind of creates an evolutionary arms race in where the predator and the prey are consistently trying to beat each other in the race for survival. Often in these predator-prey relationships, the abundance of one of the two, so predator or prey, is determined by the abundance of the other. They are so intertwined that their actual population densities depend on one another. So in general, if there is a population boom, because of, say, like an abundance of food or some other resource, you're going to have a bunch of, let's say, bunnies. Bunnies are going to be able to eat, they're going to be able to live to reproductive age, they're going to be able to survive and make more bunnies. And then you're going to eventually have too many bunnies, and the bunnies are going to overgraze the grass, right? They might, because of this high population density, there might be an easier spread of disease, and either starvation or this disease is going to cause a population crash, and a bunch of organisms are going to die. The population will then restabilize itself to a healthy level as the grass grows back from being overgrazed and the disease dies out from there not being enough members in the population to spread it. The same thing can happen, but in predators. So when there's more prey, right, this bunny population just boomed, right, that means there's going to be more food for predators. So more predators are going to be able to, eat the food, survive to reproductive age, and make babies. However, when this population of prey crashes, and you also have an abundant population of predators, your predator population is going to starve as the prey population dies off, and you start to see this oscillating cycle in numbers of predator and prey populations. A perfect example of this is the Canada lynx and the snowshoe hare. Now, lynx have many adaptations to ensure that they catch their prey. They have giant feet that kind of function as snowshoes to keep them on top of the snow. They have excellent hearing, and they have killer eyesight. They can spot prey from up to 250 feet away, even at night. Now, snowshoe hares are the main prey of lynx, and they have many adaptations that allow them to try and evade these predators. For example, snowshoe hares are white, allowing them to blend in perfectly with the snowy background of their environment, and they're also pretty speedy. While Canada lynx eat a variety of other prey animals, voles and squirrels and mice, their main staple is the snowshoe hare. And in fact, they're so dependent on the snowshoe hare for their diet that lynx cannot exist in habitats where snowshoe hares are not present. So do you remember that cycle that I talked about earlier where you have a population boom because of an abundance in a resource, right? So with the bunnies, you have a bunch of bunnies reproducing, and then eventually they're going to overgraze their grass, or a disease is going to spread and they're all going to die. And then the same thing is mimicked by predators. That's exactly what happens with Canada lynx and snowshoe hares. So when there is a low predator population of your lynx, there's low amounts of predatory animals for a population of snowshoe hares. So you have a high chance that a snowshoe hare population is going to be able to survive to reproductive age, reproduce, and their population will grow. With more hares in the population, there's more prey to support more lynx kits to survive to adulthood and to reproductive age. And then you're gonna get more lynx. The hare population then drops within the next year or two of this lynx population boom because they're being eaten by all of these lynx in their environment now. And then within the next year or two, as the hare population starts to decrease, the lynx population will decrease as well. And this has actually been charted by scientists over many years, one of them being the snapshot of time of the graph that you're being shown right now. But scientists are quite literally able to track the changes in predator and prey populations as they kind of evolve and grow and decline together because they're so dependent on one another for survival. Lynx are a specialist species, which, like I said, means that they can't survive in environments where these snowshoe hares are not present. So, as a result, they're only going to live in the boreal forests of Canada and Alaska, where these snowshoe hares also live. This makes them especially vulnerable to threats like climate change and human disturbance because they're found in such a small part of the world, and they're very specific in what they need. However, threats like climate change and human disturbance and habitat loss are not just affecting these specialist species, right? It's something that we're seeing happening worldwide. Worldwide, animal populations are decreasing because of human-wildlife conflict, poaching, habitat loss, climate change. All animals are being affected by this, It just so happens to hit specialist animals a little bit harder. As a result of all of this disturbance, we're seeing populations of animals decrease, and some are decreasing much more rapidly than others. When a population reaches a certain level of decline, this animal becomes endangered. As you lose more members of your population, you're also losing genetic diversity. So do you remember how earlier we talked about how genetic variation and genetic diversity is key for natural selection to be able to happen? Well, when you lose members of a population, with each individual that dies, you're losing the genetic diversity of that individual. And as a result, the pool of genes that natural selection can work on gets shrunk. This can lead to the phenomenon of inbreeding, which is the breeding of close relatives. Inbreeding is problematic because it increases the chances of deleterious mutations to be passed on to the next generation. Oftentimes, these deleterious mutations, if they arise, are only expressed if there are two recessive copies of that gene. If there is one recessive copy of that gene and a dominant version of that same allele, the dominant version is what's going to be expressed, and thus the recessive deleterious mutation is never going to become expressed. However, if you have inbreeding and you have two related individuals that both have this deleterious recessive mutation and they reproduce to create an offspring, and this offspring has both copies of that deleterious recessive gene, it's going to have some sort of physical or chemical abnormality that might cause it to die prematurely or be unable to reproduce. When you have high amounts of inbreeding in a population and high instances of this occurring, populations experience an inbreeding depression. An inbreeding depression is when the biological fitness of a population is decreased, and this can affect the survival and reproduction of the species as a whole. While genetic diversity can be lost through inbreeding, it can also be lost through the phenomenon of bottleneck effects. And a population bottleneck occurs when there is a drastic event, so think fire, flood, earthquake, or famine that drastically reduces the amount of animals in a population. And this diagram shows a bottleneck effect very, very well. So on the far left, you have your original population, and each color of the little, let's say, little gumballs in this jar represents some genetic diversity, right? So you've got your yellow genes, your green genes, and your red genes, and they're all somewhat evenly mixed in this original population. And now, all of a sudden, there's a famine, right? And that's this bottleneck event where you see the original population bottle being dumped into a new bottle. When you look at the surviving population after this famine, this bottleneck event, you see there's one yellow, a bunch of red, and two green. And that's all that's left of your surviving population. So as you can see, the genetic variation or the genetic diversity from the original population has been drastically decreased in the surviving population. Thus, when the surviving population reproduces, the frequency of the genes in the population is drastically going to change. So in this new population, you have a lot more reds and greens and a lot less yellows when you compare it to the original population. And something like this can potentially be detrimental for a species, right? Because they're losing a bunch of this genetic diversity that allowed them to flourish in the first place. So how can we combat this lack of genetic diversity that we can see occurring in some endangered species? Well, many AZA zoos, like ZooMontana, participate in something called a species survival program. These species survival programs help to increase genetic diversity of endangered populations by breeding animals within human care. Now, these species survival programs were started in 1981, and they're a population management and conservation program that helps maintain genetic diversity within captive populations of endangered animals. And thus, these animals can be reintroduced eventually into their natural environments, adding more genes to the gene pool for natural selection to work on. Now, at ZooMontana, we have many species involved in our species survival program, including our red pandas and our wolverines. And while we do have Amur tigers at ZooMontana, which are technically considered to be endangered, we cannot breed them, not only because they are sisters, but species survival programs have very strict regulations on who and what animals you can breed. So our tigers, Sophie and Jasmine, came to us from a roadside zoo in Florida. Now, AZA accredited zoos, especially those involved in species survival programs, keep very strict and meticulous pedigrees of their animals, which basically means we know exactly where these animals came from, we know who their parents are, we know the genetic makeup of their parents, so we know whether or not, they are pure Amur tiger or pure Bengal tiger, and maybe not, an Amur tiger Bengal tiger hybrid. However, this roadside zoo in Florida did not keep very meticulous records, and thus, we don't know the true genetic makeup of Sophie and Jasmine. We don't even know if they're pure Amur tiger. Thus, if we were to breed them with a pure Amur tiger at another zoo facility, potentially, we might be introducing genes from another subspecies of tiger into the Amur tiger population should their offspring be released into the wild. And this is something that we want to try to avoid doing. You want to keep this genetic pool of a certain species as specific to that species as possible. So you don't want to introduce new genes from subspecies of that animal. That could potentially harm the species' survival. However, just because our tigers cannot breed, it does not mean that they're not helping Amur tigers across the globe. Sophie and Jasmine function as animal ambassadors, and they help to show every person who comes to see them how cool and magnificent tigers are, and raises the awareness of the plights of their wild counterparts. And thus, just by doing that, they're aiding in species survival programs. Throughout the course of this video, we've been discussing natural selection, or survival of the fittest. That has kind of dominated the discussion of evolution, specifically with birds to dinosaurs and with the Canada lynx and the snowshoe hare population oscillations. Those have all been dictated through natural selection. In addition to kin selection and sexual selection, which can also drive evolution in their own ways, there's another form of selection that's actually human-induced. And this is known as artificial selection. This is the process by which humans individually select organisms to reproduce, passing on the human desired traits to future generations. This is how we got pet dogs and domestic cats and domestic horses and goats and sheep and alpacas. Every domesticated animal that we have today, and even plants, corn, peas, basil, cabbage, mustard, all of those arose through artificial selection by humans breeding certain individuals with one another to get a desired trait. Domestication is just the process of humans taking wild plants or animals and quite literally changing them to benefit human use. Because of domestication, another term arises, known as breeds. And breed is just terms applied to an artificially selected group of animals, and it kind of functions in the same way that a subspecies term would function, right? So you have cats, right? You have domestic cats, but you have calicos and Russian blues and Maine Coons and Sphinx and tailless and all this kind of stuff, similar to how you have a group of tigers, and then you have Bengal tigers, Sumatran tigers, Amur tigers, right? It kind of serves that same function to differentiate subgroups within a group of animals. Artificial selection is evolution in real time. It's something that humans can actually watch happening. Whereas natural selection can, like we said, take hundreds of thousands of millions of years. We can't really watch natural selection in most cases with our eyes. There are a couple exceptions, but for the most part, if we want to see evolution occur in real time, artificial selection is the way to do it. One of the perfect examples of this is actually the domestication of wild red foxes. So about 60 years ago in Russia, a scientist named Dmitry Belev was interested in studying the process through which humans domesticated dogs. So he decided to replicate this, but using red foxes. So he had a population of captured red foxes that he bred. Specifically, he bred them for positive traits such as friendliness. So he would take 2 of the foxes, who were especially friendly towards humans, and breed them. By doing so, by the 10th generation of these friendliness bred foxes, 18% of fox pups were considered quote-unquote elite, which basically meant that they sought out human companionship, among other things. By the 20th generation, the number of elite foxes seeking out human companionship increased to 35%. This happened in less than 1 century. We were able to quite literally see how humans can select for traits to make animals want to seek out our own attention. And it turns out there are other traits that are also linked to friendliness. Many of the traits that we see in our pet dogs today, such as curly tails, spots, different colorations, floppy ears that are different from their wild counterparts. So there are some pictures on this slide of what these domesticated foxes look like, and you can actually see that they look drastically different from their wild counterparts, because just by being bred for friendliness, turns out there's other genes that are linked to that trait, such as coat color and ear shape and overall face shape. So artificial selection is a super cool way to watch evolution in real time, because many people get frustrated that they can't actually see it happening. They have to rely on, evidence from the past. But this is a perfect example of evolution happening within a human lifetime. Awesome. So now that you guys kind of have a base understanding of evolution and how it works, I want to introduce another concept that I think I mentioned once earlier, called a phylogenetic tree. And a phylogenetic tree is how scientists kind of graph and chart the changes over time in evolution with organisms, species, groups, populations. We're not going to do phylogenetic trees in today's module. That is for next week. So next week we're going to be taking all the information that we learned, adaptations, birds evolving from dinosaurs, natural selection, all of those ideas, and we're going to apply them to create a phylogenetic tree. So make sure that you guys tune in next week to see what a phylogenetic tree is and learn how to create, read, and structure one. Thank you for sitting through this week's video. I am Educator Emily. If you guys are enjoying these YouTube videos and our educational content, make sure to follow us on our other social media platforms. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter as ZooMontana, where we post weekly educational fun facts that can range from 2 paragraphs to 1 little sentence. Thank you for tuning in for this week's video. I hope to see you guys next week for the creation of a phylogenetic tree. See you later.